Hello! Welcome to the Odin Mysteries channel here on YouTube. First, a big thank you to all subscribers and friends. I really appreciate your support. Now, I thought I would give a little personal and professional background info to this project. Now, the story behind the Odin Mysteries project is very tightly connected to my personal history, so I had to tell a little bit about my professional and semi-professional backgrounds. So I'm going to begin with when I finished high school. I was one of those students with very good grades, but the only reason I managed through high school was because I discovered on the way that there was an alternative to wasting my time in school. I could just read the curriculum and take private exams. This was actually an alternative in those days, and it didn't cost much, and so to the horror of my parents, I actually quit school and showed them that I could manage by myself with top grades. And the reason I quit school was because I felt it was a horrible system designed to make students competent yet stupid, competent only to become little pieces of the machinery called modern society. So when I had gotten my high school diploma, I certainly didn't want to expose myself to the educational system again, and decided to become a working class hero instead and be, as I thought, independent. Now, it took me about 6 months to realize that working as a cashier was not only horribly hard and thankless work, but neither did it offer much freedom, because you ended up exhausted in the end of every day, not wanting to do anything but watch TV maybe for the rest of the evening. And I was also frustrated as I observed how much money that went into the corporate every day, and how ridiculously small percentage of this I and my co-workers actually received at the end of the month. I also realized that this system was not going to change anytime soon, and that I had to find ways of surviving without breaking my soul and heart. So I started to work part-time and attending university after all. Now, in Norway at this time, university studies were still very free and open. It didn't cost anything, and you didn't have to attend lectures or study groups unless you wanted to. The only thing you were really obliged to do as a student was to pass an exam at the end of term. And this suited me perfectly. I think it's a horror that this system later changed into one where even adult students have to be herded around and controlled as if they were still in kindergarten. I'm lucky that my student days were finished before this new and more globalized New World Order-like system was established in Norway. Now, anyway, for 3 terms, I successfully enough studied the history of philosophy and general world history, but by then I had realized that studying what men have thought and done for the last 2,500 years was almost as depressive as working for a corporate. So I decided to follow my other vocation, namely to become an artist. I moved to England and spent my next 4 years of life there, the 3 last years in London, taking a bachelor degree in visual art at the London Institute. Now, during my first year in England, I discovered the poetic Edda, as I talked about in my poetic Edda lectures, or hidden knowledge in Old Norse myth series, video number 7. I spent the following summer holiday in Norway, for the most part inside the university and national libraries, trying to translate the names of characters and places that appear in the Edda, because I had become convinced that the hidden meaning of the myths can only be deciphered if one understands what the Old Norse people understood, the meaning of names and places in the myths. Now, as these hidden meanings started to decipher themselves inside my head, I marveled at the new and exciting metaphysical and spiritual universe of wisdom and knowledge that was being continuously revealed to me through the reading of myths. And I wanted to share this vision with the world, because I had never ever read any literature on mythology, and especially not on Norse mythology, that presented these matters in a way anywhere near what I felt and still feel that I had discovered. At the time, I was studying art, and I had always been very fond of cartoons and graphic novels. Yeah, surprise, surprise, I'm a geek. I was inspired by Neil Gaiman's The Sandman and Wendy Peeney's ElfQuest and Larry Gonic's Cartoon History of the Universe, and I decided that the best way I could transmit my knowledge was through the graphic novel medium. So over the next 3 years, in my spare time, I actually worked on a huge, enormous cartoon project, making hundreds of pages. And I've used some of the drawings from this project in my YouTube videos, but when I had finished and after 3 years and tried to let a Norwegian publisher have a look at it, I was told that, well, it would not sell, it was not a commercial work, and frankly, it was incomprehensible, and the quality of the artwork was very varied. Now, in retrospect, I have to agree. I am thankful now that it was never published as such. At the time, I was a bit let down, of course, mainly because I didn't know how else I would be able to share my mythological discovery with the world. I wondered if I had been wasting my time. However, as I soon realized, the work in itself had been very meaningful. It had, for 3 years, forced me to sit down and really deeply contemplate the myths, each stanza, each line, each hidden meaning, and how to present this visually. Having done this work meant that I by now knew the entire poetic Edda almost by heart, and that I had opened up several doors of understanding this book. And I had also, through the work with the graphic novel, realized that the many different poems of the Edda collection together actually make up one great story, one simple tale, that of the spirit of humanity, Odin, seeking to understand the huge poetic mystery that is the universe in order to finally reach an enlightened union with the soul of that universe, the goddess. Through this continuous effort, I had learned that the characters of the Edda all represent different aspects of our own being, and that all the gods and goddesses and giants and giantesses are all within ourselves. I had finished my art studies in England, but by now I decided that I had to become a professor in Old Norse mythology, and from that position of power change the paradigm of how myths are understood. I was still young and naive and actually believed that this was possible. So, I entered the University of Oslo once again, although from afar. I actually lived a bit in California during this time, and then several years in Mexico, with the exception of a few terms where I had to spend linguistic studies at the university physically in Norway, because I could be away so much, as I said, because university studies at the time still only required the students' actual physical presence at exams, where you could prove that you actually learned something. This time I enrolled in order to study for a master degree in Old Norse religion. I had to begin by studying the general history of religion, which is basically the study of the 5 so-called great religions: Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity and Islam. And that was 2 terms. Then a 3rd term where I had to specialize in one of these great religions, and I chose Hinduism because it has a connection to Old Norse myths historically. And through these studies I got some valuable information on the history of the Vedas and how Indian mythology ought to be understood as parables, mainly as parables on the spiritual quest of the human soul. This was the first time I came across literature that confirmed my convictions that myths should be read first and foremost as metaphorical allegories for metaphysical and spiritual knowledge. The last 4 terms, spanning 2 more years, I could finally concentrate mainly on Old Norse studies and research methodology. I wrote my master thesis on the ritual structure that carries the poems of the Edda. Look, and was convinced that this would be, it's this one. Here, this is my thesis that I wrote. It came out in 2004. Now, I was convinced that this would be my entry point into a PhD degree. My benefactors, my tutors, were also convinced of this, as they thought very highly of my project. And great was our surprise when I came to my examinations. So what happened is still a bit surreal to me. The examinators looked at me in a funny way, and then they said that, okay, I had actually satisfactorily proved my thesis. They had nothing to say against my arguments. Then, silence. And I was a bit puzzled because I thought they would be as excited as I was for having discovered a very basic structure in the myths that actually would provide for a whole new scrutiny of the paradigms by which we view mythology. But no, they started to flip the pages, and then, pointing accusingly at a word, they triumphed, saying that I had translated the words Valhöll and Einherji incorrectly. And that I would have to lower my grade because of this. My mistake had been to translate Valhöll literally as the Hall of Choice, because the common way of translating this name was the Hall of the Dead. Now, Val actually means choice, and the translation dead is paraphrased because the people who live in Valhall are the chosen dead. Now, I argued my reasons for translating it this way, but they, with some justification, said that to make such translations, such controversial translations in a thesis as I had, I would have to write a whole new thesis only to prove that translation. And unless I could prove that some professor of renown had already given an undisputed argument for this translation, I would have to be lowered in my grade. And I could not. I was the only one that could, through a lengthy argument, prove my case, and I was just an unimportant little master student. It was very frustrating, as this translation had nothing to do with the point of my thesis, which was the ritual structure, but they had gotten an excuse for lowering my grade, which I obviously wanted. Now, I looked to one of these professors on whose theses I had actually built some of my own, and realized for the first time that she was not happy that I had been inspired by her thesis and used it as a platform to jump further in my conclusions. I could almost see the doors of the university closing down in front of my face, and I felt a dread because my dream of becoming a professor seemed to be crushed. At the moment, the examinators, through a dreamlike blur, actually gave me a lower grade because of two peripheral words that they felt I should have translated differently. A grade that would make it harder for me to be accepted as a PhD student, which would be necessary for me to become a professor. So I did try to apply for a PhD degree over the next few years, but to no avail, and I finally gave up and realized that I would never fit into a university professorate anyway. I'm too controversial. So I worked and I started my personal therapy journey, and deciding that if I could not live from art or from scientific research, I would do something other meaningful thing and become a therapist. But I did not stop doing research. Ever since I wrote my thesis, I have kept doing research, kept developing my understanding. I once tried to get a book published in Norwegian 5 years ago, but I was told that the book was not sellable, so at some point I decided if I was to publish a book, it would have to be in English. I would have to address an English-speaking audience, because Norway is a tiny and very traditional country with very small markets that do not allow for the marginal or the controversial or the innovative. In 2009, my thesis was published in English by a German publisher. Here it is. Well, the price is a bit over the top, but it was published, and in March of 2010 I began on a hobby basis to make videos for YouTube in order to share at least some of my knowledge, and I'm very happy to realize that there are people out there who find this research meaningful, and this has been a great encouragement for me to start compiling the thousands of pages I have back here. Pages of research, in the hope of finally making a good and accessible work on Old Norse mythology. So I have to finish here, but okay. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.